and welcome. Welcome to the people in the room and also welcome to everyone online. Before I even get started, just to say this is a hybrid event, so we have with 20 odd people in the room, students and colleagues, and then we have, I think, about 40 or so, perhaps more people online, which is always complicated. So please bear with us in person and online. Hello, everyone. Do let us know in the chat if you can't see or hear. And people in the room, bear with me. If occasionally I run across the room and start frantically pressing buttons, okay? We have this under control. Okay, so it is with great pleasure that I'm introducing you to this session, this webinar, which is a collaboration between the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing and the organisation Outside in World that works to promote international children's literature and translated children's literature. So Claire and Rosemarie earlier on were talking to our students about how low the levels of translation of books coming in from other countries into the UK publishing ecosystem is, and Outside in World and also other organisations we'll mention in a second are also very much involved in advocating for international children's literature. So our webinar, our seminar today is called Scouting, Translating and Publishing Young Adult Literature from Latin America. And I am really, really delighted to introduce our two speakers today. And thank you so much for agreeing to join us. We have Claire Storey, who is a translator. She translates from German and Spanish into English, specialising in middle grade and young adult literature. And she was recently awarded funding from Arts Council England for a translation project focusing on young adult literature from Latin America. So that's what we're going to hear about today. She also does all sorts of other work with an organisation called World Kidlit, and remains very much involved in the project highlighting translated books for young people. She also acts as an international book scout, which we're going to hear all about today, as well as volunteering in schools, talking about careers with languages, and all sorts of other things as well. Lots and lots of hats. I'm also really, really pleased and honoured to introduce Rosemarie Hudson. Jamaican-British Rosemarie Hudson grew up in London, and this is where she founded her first independent publishing company called Black Amber in 1998, whose ethos was to publish unheard voices in English and international languages, and in particular, the best writers and writing from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. She's often called a trailblazer. Rosemarie is also a keen and experienced mentor, serving on the board of the book trade charity BTBS, and mentoring the Arts Council as well. Today, she's here to talk about HopeRoad Publishing, which she founded in 2010, which is an indie publisher, again, that loves to share untold stories around identity, cultural stereotyping, and injustice, and specializes in encouraging new talent and promoting the best literary voices from and about Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. I'm going to hand over to you two. Thank you so much again for joining us. And okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sophie, and to everyone for inviting us here today. Really excited to be here talking about this project, which feels like it's been a long time in developing, but thrilled with the results of this project that we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, I'll crack on. So introducing the project to you. So in 2021, I decided I was ready to take my translation practice to a new level. Are we all right?
We're good.
Okay.
Apologies.
No, that's all right. So in 2021, just to sort of give you a bit of background, I had decided after being a stay-at-home parent for a while that I was going to retrain in translation. And so I went ahead and I did a master's in translation. I came out of there thinking I was going to be a commercial translator. However, part of the master's that I had done had been translating. We'd done some translation of literary translation. We had done some picture book translations, and I absolutely loved it. And coming out there, it was an area that I started to feel quite passionate about and thinking, how can I go ahead and actually do this? So I started pursuing it. In 2018, 2019, I began to get involved with World Kid Lit, with the amazing Ruth Ahmedzai-Kemp and Marsha Lynx-Quayle. And together we were putting out blog posts about translated books for young people. And really I started to feel quite comfortable within the translation community talking about books for translating, but I wanted to be doing that myself as well. And I was trying to find my own tracks and thinking, well, I'm quite comfortable here within my translation community, but how do I take that work to the publishers? Because at the end of the day, it's the publishers who've got the contract who can make this all happen. So I need to start actually pitching my work to the people that can make this happen. I think it's quite a well discussed, well-known acknowledgement within the translation world that if you're pitching, it's a lot of work, and it's often work that you're expected to undertake without a great deal of payment, putting together samples, putting together synopsis. If it's a book you're particularly passionate about, actually taking that to a publisher can take a lot of time, a lot of energy, with no guarantee of success at the end. So I started to think, how can I get paid for doing this? I had started looking around at local funding opportunities. A real light bulb moment for me was when I saw something advertising for online and creative practitioners. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment when I realized that I was a creative practitioner. And actually up until that point, I hadn't really considered myself to be a creative practitioner. But actually as translators, that is what we're doing. We are creative, we are creating. And so one discussion, one area led to another, which led me to the Arts Council website. And the Arts Council have a project or a fund that is called Developing Your Creative Practice. It is still current, they are still taking applications. So if this is something that you think you might be interested in, I would highly recommend going and having a look at the criteria. And it says there, the DYCP supports individuals who are cultural and creative practitioners who want to take time to focus on their creative development. And I looked at that and thought, actually, you know what, that's kind of where I'm at. You can see in these boxes, hopefully if I can just move that out of the way. How can I move that? Oh, there we go. These were the things that the Arts Council DYCP project supports. And from there it was thinking, well, okay, how can I fit what I want to do? I want to be creating new work. Yes, I want to be creating samples, experimenting with new collaborators, talking to people, talking to other people already working in this industry to better my own practice. International travel. Oh, well, there's some book fairs that could be quite good. The one in the middle at the bottom down there, research and development time to explore practice and take risks. And I'll come back to that one in a little while, because the taking risks, I don't know why it keeps jumping, but the taking risks element came into some of the choices that I made later on in the project to think about what actually I wanted to achieve and what my purpose of doing this was. And it's thinking about this not just being a pitching project, actually it was also about my own development. So the choices I made, the book choices, the projects I had decided to work on also reflect the fact it was about bettering myself as a translator and being able to use this not only as a pitching project, but also to improve my own skills as well. So if you're applying to the Arts Council, I'd highly recommend that you have a really clear plan of what you're going to do. They ask for you to itemize all the elements of expense that you're going to have. So if you can really sort of try and narrow down your plan as to what it is that you're going to do, and even if you're not applying for funding, actually it's really useful to sort of almost sit down and think to yourself, well, what is my process? What am I going to do? And so this was my project plan that I proposed to the Arts Council and that they felt able ultimately to support. So one of the things they pay you for as part of the grant is research time. And so they pay you an hourly rate. You have to stipulate how many hours and what fee you're going to pay yourself to sit down and research or sit down and do your own development. So I was able to go and research the UK YA market. I went and stood in Waterstones and had a look around, went into bookshops and see what's out there in the UK. Who is publishing? Who is publishing translated young adult literature who do I need to go and speak to? Then to go and research my source language markets. Again, who is publishing? What awards are there? What are the top books coming out, or who are the big writers in those territories with those language combinations? My plan was to select 2 books. I ended up with 4. You know, these things happen, just so many good books out there, but my plan had originally to be select 2 books. I was then going to prepare comprehensive presentations and samples. And then I was going to take those presentations and I was going to get feedback from colleagues, but I was actually going to be able to pay these colleagues. So a bit, as we were talking earlier about translation work being unpaid, actually it felt quite good for me to be able to go to somebody and say, can you have a look through my translation? I can pay you this fee. And actually I was very fortunate. One of the great things about this project has been the people that I've been able to speak to, and the advice, and people have been very open and supportive with sharing you know, their own knowledge with me as I have embarked on this project. And I've been really, really grateful. I think that is one of the real top things of this project, that I've been able to make those connections and speak to people. I was then going to travel to the book fairs, Bologna Children's Book Fair, and then the London Book Fair. And my plan was through that to pitch to UK-based publishers. So it's Arts Council England. So at this stage, it was talking about UK publishers. So that was my plan. Why Latin America? Well, I'm a Spanish translator, so it's an area, of course, that is a huge area of potential. I mentioned earlier that I'd been involved with World Kid Lit, and every year at World Kid Lit, we publish, Ruth puts together the information that we gather through word of mouth often, so there's a caveat that says we might be missing some titles. But every year we put together a list of books that are being published in that year in translation. And it became quite evident through those lists and through the books that we were talking about on the blog and the people we were speaking to, that the languages of the books that are being translated were very much Eurocentric. You know, there's lots from places like Germany, Dutch is quite a popular language, French, often also the places that have the literary structures available to fund and able to promote language from literature from these countries. And that, from my perspective, looking at YA, there were many more books for the picture book group age groups, some middle grade, but actually not as many at the older end of the spectrum. I also had conversations with colleagues. As I said, one of the joys of this project has been able to talk to people and establish that about the time when I was looking, for about 5 years previously, we couldn't think of any YA books from the Spanish-speaking Americas that had been directly acquired here in the UK. I know Rosemarie had published the Wild book from Mexico, but that had been acquired originally in the US and then subsequently published in the UK. But actually there had been nothing directly acquired. And I sort of sat there thinking, well, why not? This is such a vast region. Why is nothing coming out of there? A further thought from that would actually be to say, you know what, my next step along this project would actually now to be going, well, actually, it's not just Latin America. Let's break these countries up. It's not just Latin America. But at this stage where I was, it was looking at Latin America as a whole and thinking, why have we not got any literature coming out of there? So I started researching what was coming out. I was talking to people in this period of research, and things started to crop up that I found really interesting. That the concept of young adult doesn't cross over neatly between countries and cultures. We can start off by talking about age groups, that as we think about young adult, is young adult different to teen books? And where are those boundaries? Where do we put them? And how do they cross over with other countries? I had these interesting comments back from publishers saying, the first publisher saying that they found that often books that were categorized as YA were more suitable to an MG audience, so that books were generally aimed at a younger audience. But after I put all this together, I sent it off to publishers. A different publisher then came back and said, these YA books are too old for our list. So it's interesting to sort of think, where is that age group? And if something is being accoladed, if it's being awarded prizes in a young adult category or in a youth category in one country, for me, it sort of says, well, we can carry that over. Why do we have to be so constrained about if it's teen, if it's YA, it's for young people. So I found that element of things really interesting. I don't know, Rosemarie, if you have any comments about age groups of books. Do you find
it's confusing?
It's confusing.
And I don't know the children market, because the children's market is 0 to, I think, 6 or 7. And it's very confusing. So I have a list in my office where I have age group, so say 12, and it tells me what K, whatever it is that they use, is a K2 or whatever those numbers are. So I get an idea of what age group. So we really publish from 11 or late till 10, so 11 up. So you get a young adult, teens, and older. So anything for teens, so you go right into the 20s. So yeah, it is a difficult choice sometimes, but yeah, I'm just learning it actually.
Yeah.
But I don't know the children's market at all.
Yeah. The other thing I suppose it ties in a bit with age groups is about content. And I had a comment from a Mexican literary agent, Lorenzo Standia, that publishers can be unwilling to accept titles they think include topics that are too difficult, and in some cases for young adults. We get into cultural discussions about what is acceptable. We can talk about swearing, we can talk about nudity and sex. What is appropriate and acceptable for discussion in one culture isn't necessarily the same in another, and who gets to decide what is or what isn't. So that was another interesting idea. I also found it really interesting thinking about book length. This is a comment from Mariana Ruiz in Bolivia. And she was saying that she doesn't know about other authors. For instance, my most extensive YA novel is barely 18,000 words long. And actually, if you look at the book that Rosemarie published earlier in November, I don't know if you can see that on the camera. Yes. But if you see how skinny it is, it's actually just over 20,000 words long, which if you compare that to books as you go into the bookshops and you see them all, a lot of the YA big epic sagas, fantasy, often what, 50,000?
We've published 60,000.
60,000
in a series, yeah.
And actually, how prohibitive is that? But it's quite a different tradition to what we have for publishing. So if you bring a shorter book, sort of, well, I don't really know what to do with it. But then if you turn up with a big heavy tome, a first part of a trilogy, you then think, well, what about the translation costs? Because that also comes into play. If it's a book that's being translated, you have to pay the translator on top of acquiring the rights, on top of the publication. So actually, is that a negative impact that you come with a book that might sell quite well, but it's going to be a lot more expensive? So all of these thoughts started to shape. Do you have any comments about book length? Do you get put off by anything?
No, the book length is very important. The rule is, and the law is, that translators are paid £100 per 1,000 words. And so you really have to add all of that up. And if the country you're buying from doesn't give you a translation grant, you have to think twice about, can you afford it?
Yeah.
So sometimes you look forward to the translation grant, although you get your translation grant after publication. So you still have to find money to pay that first bit of money to the translator on signing. So the contract, once a contract is signed by the translator, you have to give them a third of the money. Once they've given you the manuscript, you have to pay them the second bit of the money. And when publication, they get a third of one. So by the time they get to the third amount paid to translate, you're really broke as an independent press.
Yeah.
But you don't, somehow you just don't let that get in the way. You just find a way.
Yeah.
which
And
is
just
not
say that
business, but
£100, the golden figure,
The golden
is an
figure.
observed rate, so it's not a definite given. If it's a really complicated, it could be more than that, but in the region of 100.
Can I ask a question since we're
Yep.
approaching the issue of payment? Do you, as a publisher, or have you encountered publishers that with whom you could negotiate also a percentage on royalties?
So the question, just for the online team, I don't know if you can hear that, is whether or not we negotiate royalties with publishers as a translator.
In addition to the fee?
Yes.
In addition
yes.
to the fee.
It's quite a small amount. It's usually about 2%, because don't forget you're paying the author, but the original author about 7.5%, 8%. So you pay the translator like 2 and a bit % of the royalties on top of the 7% and on top of their advance that they've had already. Yes.
Okay. So yeah,
Yep.
I will move on. I also thought it was interesting as I was researching about some of the expectations of translated YA, and actually this was one comment that really stuck with me as I was thinking about the books I was going to select, possibly more than Manuel thought. So this was in an interview that I carried out for World Kidlit. Manuel Soriano is a publisher in Uruguay. He publishes some amazing picture books, but sort of adult picture books. And he came back and said, some agents have told us that many of our books are not what English language publishers expect from a book from a South American country. The message was, give me something about your local culture. And I suppose as you start thinking about Latin America, sort of thinking, okay, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, if it's a Mexican book, does it need to be about drug trafficking? Is it about migration? You know, are those the sort of topics that you're expecting? And if it's not anything to do with that, is it going to get, well, why would we take that? Because we've got our own. And as you'll see from my book selections, I think that was quite something that stayed with me as we went through it. Again, sort of expectations. This was another interview that I did with David Bowles, Mexican-American author and translator, who finished up this interview saying, I think we should be translating the very best of Latin American kidlit, regardless of the difficulties of voice and tropes, heedless of whether the work is essentially Latin American from some rubbernecking perspective. So again, quite forceful, saying, you know, we shouldn't just be taking the books we think we should be having. Actually, why not broaden that? Why not do something a bit different, perhaps? So having done this research and starting to hear these conversations, it was coming around to actually now putting these pictures together. One of the things I will say also about the Arts Council grant is that they give you a large portion of it up front. And in about November of 2021, so about maybe 6-8 months in, I had a lot of life stuff going on, you know, the life stuff that gets in the way. And there is a possibility that had I not had this grant from the Arts Council, I would have just gone, I just can't do this anymore. I need to get all this stuff ready. It's just too much. And, you know, all this life stuff is really getting me down. And it could have been that I walked away. But actually, the Arts Council had already given me the money. And you only get the next bit of it if you give them a present, or you have to write up a ditty at the end to say, this is what I've done with your money, and here it is. And actually, I have to say thank you to the Arts Council, because I'm still here and I'm still going. And possibly without the grant, I might not be. And I think as translators, we have to also recognise that this can be quite an emotional roller coaster as we go along as well, and recognise that, you know, the financial burden can be eased with grants like this one, and any other that we can tap into. So yeah, so I started to sort of question myself, well, why am I pitching? What I've said that I want to start pitching this to publishers, but what do I actually mean when I'm talking about pitching? Why do I want to pitch? You know, the first one, is to get work as a translator. We are working in an industry, and this is your job. You know, ultimately, we deserve to be paid for what we're doing. And I'm quite open at the moment to say, you know, I work a part-time job. I have a part-time job in a travel company because I need a stable income to be able to support the translation work that is less stable. I was also pitching to a certain extent to disrupt and challenge the status quo, as we talked about these expectations. I knew that if I wanted to challenge some of those, this was where this idea of taking risks with the project really comes in, because actually it was a bit of a risk to publish or to pitch something that was not what the publisher might be expecting. And that risk was that it wouldn't go anywhere, that actually the pitch as I'm taking it actually wouldn't appeal to any publishers, and therefore all the work that I put into it wouldn't go anywhere. And that, I think, as translators, that's a risk that we take on, that a book that we're pitching doesn't go anywhere, or that it goes somewhere else to a different translator. But actually this project allowed me that freedom to go, do you know what, I can do this on this occasion. And I think if you are pitching, it's worth having that conscious decision. Why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you need the money? And are you going to choose then a book that's going to have a broader appeal, or are you doing it to try and disrupt and challenge? You know, having my work with World Kid Lit as well, I wanted to increase visibility. I wanted to be able to then take these books and use them in a way that could bring more engagement, I suppose, with translated literature. And I suppose the last one, which often we think about when we're pitching, is I've just read a great book in a foreign language and I really want to get it published. And I think we often do that, and we often get really, really caught onto a book and think, you know, this is where all of my efforts lie. I have to get this book published. If I don't get this book published, then it's all going to come crashing down. And I suppose I would like to invite people to have a mind shift with this and actually talk about pitching as pitching not just a book but yourself. And I think talking about how I pitched, I think if you can think of pitching as pitching your services longer term beyond this book, actually into being a professional within the industry, whether that is a translator, whether or not that is as a scout, as that is sort of the things you're doing. So the way I did it was that I put all of this information into a project document. I used Canva, if anybody's used Canva, but I used the free version of it. And I put it into a PDF document. I color coded it because I like bright colors. And so it made it easy for publishers to negotiate. Also, I thought it made me look more professional. You know, at the end of the day, this is my calling card. If I'm going to be approaching lots of publishers with it, I want them to be impressed by what I've put together. Even if they don't like the project, even if they don't like the books, I wanted them to remember that file was really impressive.
Yes, very impressive.
And you are up against agents, you're up against professional scouts who are putting these things through, who have a brand. And so actually, if that's what they're doing, that's kind of where I see we need to be doing. And actually, it is one of the things that Rosemarie has commented on since, that actually the overall document that I put together.
Yes, in fact, even before I started reading the stories, the presentation was so good. Not only colorful, but by scanning through it, I could see she's put a lot, whoever this person was, they put a lot of work in it. I knew a little bit about them. And then they gave me details about the publisher, where it's coming from, a little bit about the author, very good synopsis, and a good three-chapter translation sample. And it was, I liked it very much. And I think that's what drew me to it more than reading the books first. I looked at the presentation, it worked for me very well. So I congratulate you on that, Claire. That was very good. Keep it up.
I also created some marketing materials. I already had my own website, but I dedicated a page of my website to the project. I also created some flyers. Again, I don't know if you can see those online. Is that coming across okay? Yeah, so I created a little flyer, double-sided flyer, that I actually took out with me wherever I went if we were going to book fairs. And I found this to be a really useful tool. And so last year I created another one. You'll notice it's very similar colours. This year it's going to an A6 postcard size. But I've just ordered those for the London Book Fair. And I find these are really useful tools to be able to take to people. And as you're going to these book fairs, I mentioned it in a little while, that actually it's a really useful thing to be able to sort of sit down with somebody and say, oh, this is what I've been working on. And if there are any translators out there, I say to you, or if you're a writer and you've got some little projects, can you put it together as a project? Can you look back at what you've, I'm sure if you're anything like me, you've got projects sitting in a folder on your laptop that you started 18 months ago and perhaps haven't looked at for a while. Can you revisit that? Can you find a common theme and put them together and actually approach people not just with I've got this one book, but actually I'm a translator, I've got these are my current projects that are going. Because again, that is what agents do, that is what publishers do, and it takes the pressure off it being a one book wonder, if you like, that actually you've got more than one string to your bow, you've got a few things. And you can also, as you get to know these publishers, start to say, well, actually this one I think would be really good for your list. Or I'm not sure about that one for you, but this one might work. And you can really build those relationships.
And those are very good because people don't have the time to listen to a conversation, especially at the book fairs. You just hand them out as you go along. There's no time, especially if you don't have a meeting booked with them. It's just hand them out, and I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
very good.
And actually,
and your contact details are on there. So
and the QR code.
Yeah.
And so actually I do have a memory, I think I'm going to go on to Bologna in a moment, but I do have a memory of the last day in Bologna of going, this is my moment, this is my one opportunity that I'm going to be here. And I ran around that room on the last day just going, I lost all shame. I had said this, I lost all shame, just going up to people going, can I just leave this information with you? I'm a translator, can I leave this with you? I did the same in London a few weeks later. And again, it's not just about pitching those books, it was actually about pitching me and being visible and being memorable. We could go into about pitching, that's a whole other discussion. I've put on the screen here some really good pitch guides. There's been some really good resources in the last few months. So I'd recommend, if you want to think about what goes into a pitch and how to put it together, these 3 pitch guides here or advice are really worth going to have a look at. So trips to book fair. My wonderful colleague Ruth and I got on a train and went from London to Bologna by train for an amazing few days at the book fair there, and then on to London. And I just find it so much easier to go to these book fairs. And if anybody is going to London, the literary translation area is amazing. But actually to go and have a project to talk about, or to be able to go and talk about my current recommendations, and it has become for me in my diary that I prepare myself for London. I've just put live my current recommendations for this year, just put a plug in for that. Absolutely. And so that is what I will be doing at London this year. I'm building on those relationships that actually have already happened. I'm going to ask Rosemarie to just tell us a bit about HopeRoad. Tell us about HopeRoad.
Yes.
Why
I translated young adult
why
fiction.
You translated?
Yes.
Why
yes.
Hope? And why Hope? What? Yeah.
Well, HopeRoad was set up primarily to publish the unheard voices, the neglected voices that the big publishers wouldn't touch, because as far as the unknown, like I remember when we had a Chinese author and we wanted to publish that book, and people weren't thinking about that far. You need the French, the Italian, and the Spanish. That's security. Everybody knows about, but the unknown is those foreign places. So like everything else, we wanted to make a difference, and we wanted to change the status quo of the industry, and especially with young adult. We didn't start it off by publishing young adult fiction. We only started publishing about 5 years ago because there was a need for all these young adult writing to be translated, and that's very important for us. So alongside the adult translations that we do, the young adult is very important because we want the young English, British person reading to know a little bit about another culture, another country, and that the same thing that's happening to them here, it's possibly happening to that character, or has happened to that character, and they can identify with a character who is 10,000 miles away. So that's why we do what we do at HopeRoad for the young adult readers.
Oh. So if I go on, we're just going to move on to sort of a section where I actually talk a bit about the books that I selected for this project. I'll talk a bit about why I chose them, and perhaps Rosemarie can sort of jump in and talk about.
This is a Spanish version. No, this is a Uruguay version of that.
Yeah, I don't know if they're showing up on the screen. Can you see both?
Yes,
those?
they are.
Yep.
I can see them.
So yeah, so this was the first book that has been published. This one came out in November last year. It was also the first one, I don't know why it keeps jumping. It was also the first one that I decided that, yes, this is a book that I'm going to do. So I had scoured various publications. I had looked at the White Ravens. I looked at countries if they had their own listings, their own prize givings. And Federico Ivanier was he's a very acclaimed Uruguayan writer for young people. He's won lots of awards. And this was one that I came across, and I came across it actually through the publisher, actually through Manuel Soriano, who I mentioned earlier. I asked him, do you know of any writers? He put me in touch with the publisher in Uruguay, Criatura. I had a Zoom call with the publisher there, who then put me in touch with Federico directly. Quite unusually, perhaps Federico is the rights holder for the books. Agenting actually isn't really a thing where he is in the world. So actually all the negotiations were with Federico directly. So for me, why this book? The personal challenge as a translator. This book is all written in the present tense. It is all written in the second person. Sophie's nodding. It's quite unusual. It's all you go here, you do that, you go there, you hear this. So as a very
anonymous character.
An anonymous character. There's a real big twist at the end, which I won't give too much away. But on a personal level, as a translator, thinking of this as the developing your creative practice, this was, yeah, it was a personal challenge to me as a translator. Could I translate something like this and make it work? There were times when I sort of looked back and went, oh, I can't do this. Also, the challenge of it being Uruguayan Spanish as opposed to Castilian or Spanish was interesting. And I had a few conversations as well with one of my World Kidlit co-editors, Jackie Friedman-Migdal in the States, as we were talking about UK English, US English. How did all of that fit together, and where did it sit with this book? So they were just interesting challenges from a translation perspective. But it was set in Europe, but it was written by a Uruguayan author. So actually for publishers who were perhaps a bit nervous about doing something from Uruguay, far-flung country, being set in Europe might have made it more familiar to them. And going back to these expectations of what we want from Latin America, it's not about Latin American challenges or otherness. It's very much an amazing book, interesting, unusual, that happened to be written by somebody in Uruguay.
It's a good read.
It is.
That's what you go for. A good read. Is the reader going to, the purchaser going to enjoy this book? It has to be a good read no matter what. That's the first thing, because the word gets around.
Yep.
So yes, that's a big read.
What also became evident in our discussions is that Federico speaks excellent English and was very, very keen to get involved in what we might have been doing in marketing terms. And this is where our relationship as publisher and translator also came into action, because quite early on I had said to Rosemarie, I've got quite a few ideas about what I might like to do with these books. And Rosemarie sort of went, okay, tell me about them. And one of the things was the Young Adult Literature Convention that happens every year at Olympia in London as part of the Comic-Con. And they have a lot of panel discussions. They have, you know, really best-selling. It's all about YA. If YA is your thing, you'll be in heaven. And they have the publishers there selling directly. And I saw that they opened their author submissions. So I said to Rosemarie, how about we try and get Federico over for this event? And Rosemarie said yes.
No idea where the money was going to come from to bring him over, but we said we tried. And
Yeah.
yes, we made the application to ILC, and his book was accepted. We submitted like 3 titles, and his book was accepted. So, but we got to get him here somehow. Now, I mean, we've started the ball rolling, so might as well go through to the end. So yes, he did make it.
Yeah, he did. And one of the things I was really thrilled about was that they included Federico on a panel, and it wasn't a panel about translated YA. It was a panel about writing thrillers. And on the screen, I'm sorry, I can't remember all of the names, but there's Holly Jackson, Kathleen Glasgow. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. And so they have written, they're best-selling New York Times bestseller list authors, and Federico was on that stage with them.
And he was extremely funny.
He got
he fitted in so well. But
yeah. And while he was here, we also we went to the University of Leicester and spoke to the students at languages and English students. And we also went to a state school in Nottingham. And so actually he was a real asset to have doing these things, because he just was able to adapt and speak. So while, it's not always necessary, actually, if you know that your author that you're pitching has this ability and is willing to get involved, that could be a real bonus. So the next book, which is going to be published in July, which I have recently submitted, is The Darkness of Colours. This one is from Argentina, and it's a historical thriller. So you can see it's won a few awards or recognition. Also, not just in the Spanish version, but it also was awarded for the French translation in Belgium. And again, why this book? Well, for me, again, personal challenge. It's a different challenge. I've been trying to channel my inner C.S. Lewis, my inner 3 Men in a Boat. So I've been trying to write my narrative at turn of the century sort of language in a quite different way. Again, not about Latin American challenges or anything else. It's a great reveal. I leapt from my seat as I went, I understand. So yeah, that was book number 2. Which,
so excuse me,
yeah,
Claire presented 4 books in her presentation, and we chose 3. And for a first-time translator of fiction, young adult fiction, pitching, it was a big deal for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so I had done 1 full-length translation before this, and I was going into this very much thinking, this is kind of make or break. I think I had given myself until Christmas, maybe 2022. Might have said to a few friends, if nothing happens by the end of the year, that's it. And then an email came through from Rosemarie saying, we'd like to do 3 of them. And I almost fell off my chair and messaged a friend and said, somebody wants to do 3? You sure she's not like mistyped? But no, Rosemarie was interested in 3 of them, and I'm absolutely thrilled. On the back, the flip side of that is also saying, though, that actually no other publishers showed any interest at all. So actually what might have happened if Rosemarie hadn't been there doing the work that she is doing, and this whole thing might have been quite a different story. And sometimes it can be about finding the right person at the right time. And as we talk as well about using your pitch, not just for 1 book, I've actually had some work come from publishers that actually said no to this project. One of the people who said these books are too old actually came back and said, we've got this German language, so actually my other language combination we'd like you to do, or would you be able to do this for me? So actually work has come from this project indirectly, because I've been able to pitch myself and my services. The last book that Rosemary is going to publish from this particular project is The Wild Ones, and this is from Mexico. And why this book? So I've talked a lot about this idea of it not being about Latin American struggles. Actually, this one, I suppose, fits into this idea a bit more about, you know, drug trafficking, about gang violence, about poverty. And I wanted to include this one, in part because that might help in a way to ease this project a bit, but actually to start with a social realism book that a publisher might feel a bit more comfortable with, rather than these other slightly unexpected titles. But also representation matters, as we talk about who is writing and what they're writing. Antonio Ramos Revillas has said in interviews that this book is one of his books that he has had to research the least, because it draws so much on his own lived experience, and discussion about the gang violence and the drug trafficking. Well, that wasn't necessarily his own lived experience. He had friends who did disappear. He had friends who were involved, and actually a lot of what he discusses comes from his own life experience. I also spent time in this region of Mexico back when I was learning Spanish. So it's set in the city of Monterrey, up in the north of Mexico. And he uses a lot of slang. And actually, this is the most challenging text, I think, that I have to translate, because it's trying to make this work and make it feel genuine. But because I had spent a year of my life up in this area, and I'm not trying to claim that I have lived experience in the same way of this, but the language that I heard, the way it was being used by people of that age, it felt familiar, and I feel really excited about the idea of trying to convey these languages that are very place specific, even within Mexico. It's specific slang to this area, which is how I'm then the challenge of trying to pitch it. It's also the one that Rosemary says that she really enjoys, or really appreciates.
For me, it's yes, and I tell you, the relevance to what happens within the UK is so akin to what's happening in that book, because you have a mother who is in prison, accused of stealing, and the two or three children that are left. The older one has to take care of the siblings, and one of our other London author's book is about a mother who is in prison, and the son has had to be fostered out. So what you have is very similar to what's in that book, what can happen and what has happened in the UK. So the whole idea of it being foreign, it's not right in that respect. It's foreign because the author is foreign, but the book is so movable within the society that we live in. So but also it's very exciting. It moves. It's a different, each book, they're all different. They're completely different.
And that was my purpose in this, to actually give myself those different challenges, to give myself an opportunity to explore my own craft and to see whether or not could I translate in these ways, could it be successful? And in some instances, it gave me the freedom to try things that somebody else might have said, just don't do it like that. But actually it gave me the freedom to try it out, speak to people. And all of these, the samples I did, went to colleagues who then also fed back to me to help to improve. Sophie, how are we for time? Do we need to?
Another minute?
Yeah. I mean, really, it's just my closing comments to say that we do have an exclusive offer for participants. If you'd like to scan the code, it takes you to HopeRoad, to the website, and you can pre-order
the ones that are not published yet.
And then just my final words, just really, if any of you are thinking of pitching, send that email. The worst two outcomes are that nobody ever replies, which is quite soul destroying, or that they say no. But that rejection doesn't necessarily mean no forever. And I would, again, perhaps turn this idea of rejection on its head. Embrace rejection. If somebody's rejected you, they've read your stuff, or they've at least read some of it. If you've never sent it because you're scared somebody will say no, then nobody's ever got the opportunity to say yes. So actually embrace rejection. I saw something on Twitter that said that this person was part of the rejections club, that they aimed for a certain number of rejections every year, because if he got 50 rejections, he'd sent his work to 50 people.
And sometimes when somebody rejects that book, they remember you and think, ah, here's another book from that person, or we'll call that person because they sent us that book and we can use them to do. So it's always worth getting rejected. I've had one author who was rejected 35 times. And the moment I spoke about this earlier, the moment the book landed on my desk, I said, yes, this is for us. So it depends who is looking at it, always who is looking at it, what they're looking for, what their house is going to publish. But a lot of the time, a lot of the big houses, they don't want to take the chance because is it going to make money? That's a lot about money. So that's why we're independent little presses. A lot of us about.
And that's everything. I'm going to go back onto that code. So that
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
There you go.
Thank you very much. This is going to be, that was a wonderful, wonderful presentation and lovely to hear the
Well done, Claire.
conversations. I'm aware there's lots of chat already, lots of questions online. So I'm going to ask Nicola, are you going to be all right to, and also we've recorded the chat and so forth, so I'll send, if we can't answer everything, because I suspect we can't, I will send on to you both as well, so you can see.
Yep.
You're on the phone. Sorry.
Am I?
You're in the way. You're in the way.
I'm so sorry. Whoops. So do we have any questions? I'll take in person and then online, and we'll kind of see how we go. Anything, Katrina?
Yeah,
speak up.
really interesting for multiple reasons. But I work on Latin America, and I was really pleased to see you saying we're just going to publish great literature, and it just has to be from Latin America.
Yep.
I don't know if you probably know the work of Chaco Press, who do that for
Yep.
Latin American literature
Yep.
in general, and it's just wonderful to see that being broken through, and you're not, oh god, another one of
Yep.
these, you know. So,
Yep.
but I just wondered how you're going to handle that in terms of the marketing. So, are you going to be sort of putting Latin America in the background in the marketing, or is it still going to be front and center, given that you've chosen texts that are not sort of what a UK audience might stereotypically think of Latin America? I just wondered kind of what your plan was, just out of interest.
No, the marketing is going to take center stage. It's no point after spending money on the book, you don't just put it aside and not think about marketing. And for the authors who can't get here, I'm going to have a word with Sophie, because what we're planning to do is zooming the author from wherever they are, Mexico or Argentina, and do live launch Zooms, several Zooms into situations like this. This is the sort of thing we would do. We'll try to do.
I mean, will Latin America focus prominently in that?
So far,
Yes.
so far it has.
Yes.
And yes, sort of again, just sort of shouting about it. And I do acknowledge as well that actually within the books I have chosen, actually Mexico and Argentina are two countries that actually they have the structures, they have those literary bodies that support in most cases. So actually I suppose my next thing is to try and break that down as well, and to be actually looking at which countries and that sort of thing would be a next step.
So a few questions in relation to about your picture.
Yep.
Yeah, when is the Wild One understood? When is the Wild One being published? And there's a question about the fourth book. Do you still
Yeah.
picked up, especially as it's
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, do you want me to answer those ones? So the Wild Ones will be out in October 24, so at the end of this year.
So we're bringing out the two last books this year.
Yeah, so they're both coming out this year. Yeah, the fourth book is still available. Just to briefly touch on that, it's by Maria Teresa Andretto, who is, an absolute. She's just a star in Argentina. She's won the Hans Christian Andersen, I want to say, but she's not being translated into English. So yes, that is still there. It's quite a literary text, which too literary for YA. It's actually a very short novella. It's about 10,000 words long. So again, it's not challenging. So yeah, it's still there. If anybody would like to publish it.
Turns out it was short.
Daniela?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentations. I would like to ask you something about this request, implicit request, and sometimes explicit request from British publishers to select titles that speak a little bit more about the local culture, right? And I was a bit, I mean, this is a so-called ethnographic frame that is often very common, and it's been so for quite some time actually. When it comes to marketing or understanding, decoding foreign literature. But I was a bit surprised by the way you interpret the local culture, and you come up with the Mexican example and the drug cartel. So they specifically say that they want something rough.
No, not
Because
necessarily
I
something.
struggle
Sorry, that
with-
was just sort of. But
Yeah.
it could be that they want something that is very much set in that place, that it could be very much located. That there are points that make it in some way perhaps exotic. That it is.
It's similar. It's similar to the way a writer in the UK or anywhere would write a book, say about crime, and he takes his second book to the publisher, and the book publisher says, "But I want the same thing again," and the writer is writing something completely different. It's very similar to that. So they expect from a country or an author the same thing. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, it does, but because I was just struck by the
Yeah,
specific
yes,
example.
yeah,
Yes,
like,
yes,
oh,
because they
young
expect of a
adults in
certain.
Mexico involved in
Yeah, it's
drugs.
just-
No, of
yeah.
course. But there's sort of if you're thinking about
Yeah.
that country that perhaps might
Mm.
spring to mind, but no, or that it was just.
No,
Sorry.
it's fair enough. That's why I'm, so have you come across this ethnographic frame very often? Like it's an explicit request that you come across?
It's not an explicit necessary request that I've come. It's just sort of anecdotally, I suppose. That I don't know.
But
if you,
publishers like they like the familiar.
Yeah.
A lot of, especially because they like the familiar because they're sure it will sell. And as I say, if they expect something from a writer who's probably a bit successful with that genre that he or she did, and they want the same thing again, but the author is trying to get out of it. And the continent of South, say South America, they expect certain things to come out of South
Yes.
America. And that's why, Claire, what have you said? That's, they want crime and gun running, and they want that to come out of South. And what we're trying to do is to give them South America as it is. The crime and the killing is just that much. We have that in England too,
I know.
so
Okay, fair
does that
enough.
make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks.
it's important that.
Do we have some online questions?
Just a question.
so, did we talk about the £100 per 1,000 words? So, the Society of Authors, for anybody outside the UK, is
Yes.
an organisation that supports writers, translators here in the UK, and they have what they deem an observed rate, and that observed rate is what they see. They offer a contract vetting service, and so actually it's what they are seeing coming through. It isn't a hard and fast
It has
rule.
become,
It's not a hard
as
and
it not
fast
now,
rule
'cause
that should be.
decided
It is.
translate
They
it.
suggest on the website that this should be a starting point
Oh.
for negotiation. £100 per 1,000 words. It'll depend as well on your own situation. The novel. Do you accept more? Do you agree to take less? As we talk about translation grants, it might also depend country to country where there is funding, if there is funding available, if those literary structures are available, and also if the literature that you are wanting to publish, actually, do you want to accept those translation grants from the bodies, the authorities, as well? So there's thoughts around that as well. Does that help? Does that?
May I ask a question?
Mm.
And particularly probably addressed to Rosemarie, actually, because I'm curious. I think Claire's talk at the beginning, you set out really interestingly that the multiple considerations about translate that you take into account when you're sort of translating this idea of age, and what's appropriate for young adults in one country and then transposing into another culture, all those confusing questions of age banding and, you know, sort of, you were talking also about that kind of worrying about what you know, what big organizations might say and what schools might say about things that are acceptable, have passed and been published in one country, but in this country are going to cause problems for that age group. So I just wondered, because you have two lists, well, you have lots of lists, but you have you publish adult fiction, but you also now publish young adult fiction. Is there a big difference between publishing translations in adult fiction and publishing translations in young adult fiction, would you say?
The difference is the language. So if, say, I mean, particularly in Claire, in Claire's circumstances, we had did we mention that earlier? We had an issue, not an issue per se, but an issue in this book where the main character, the way he held a girl was accepted in the Spanish edition, but it wouldn't be accepted in this edition because it implies certain things. But if it was an adult novel, we wouldn't have touched it. Adults can read whatever they like to read, whatever the language, whatever the cuss words are, whatever, that's fine. But the young adult has to be just so. So very few corrections were taken, liberties were taken with the original text, and the author approved it.
Yeah.
But we don't let that. We find a way. You have to find a way to work with the translation, and most of the time the author is happy to have things changed. It's like if you were to publish a book in the UK from an American publisher, we would change the Americanism in that book. We wouldn't give it to an English reader, a UK reader.
So you're really subjecting the young adult material to more scrutiny.
More scrutiny, because not just us, but the organizations, like there's an organization called Book Trust, and the librarians, they tell us that it's a little bit, you know, can you tone it down a bit? Yeah, so sometimes what we do, we send our manuscript to librarians and ask them for their input. And if they approve that, we're happy. Yeah.
Would you do that just with translations, or are you going to be doing that? That's
young adult
across
all the way through. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have any more? There was a question about editing back.
Okay. Few more minutes. If there are any more questions, anyone else? Can I then? I'm going to just abuse my position.
Yes.
But it seems to me the finances, the economics of this, particularly because it's independent publishing, and you know, that's really come up very clearly, how precarious it is, but also just how important the translation grants are as well, as you say.
Yeah.
Do you think, so if I've understood correctly, say you're publishing a book from Argentina, you would then apply to the Argentinian.
So some countries will have.
Not,
well, that one,
Mexico?
Argentina, we applied for, but
Yes,
we didn't get.
And I said Mexico doesn't.
Mexico doesn't have one, or it has a very complex way of doing it. But the books that we were working with actually wasn't eligible for their funding. So if there's not funding with a certain country, you can look at other ways. PEN is one English PEN here in the UK. There's also the PEN Heim grant that it can also be awarded to the translator if you're working on a project. So there can be other ways of funding.
But the funding, the funders, they're getting smaller every year, the funders. So you end up having to think, oh my God, I have to do this, I'm going to do this. But you find a way of doing, if you've taken on the book, you have to find a way of doing it without those grants. You have to either delay it until something you're expecting come in, or like, as you say, funding bodies, but they're still there, they're giving smaller amounts of money. More people are looking for grants. It's over the past 4 or 5 years, it's become really hard. And a lot of granting agency are focusing on charities instead of limited company like us. So it is difficult.
And it's also not guaranteed. So so even as we applied to Argentina, thinking, you know, we can tap into that pot, actually we didn't get
that. No.
So yeah.
So I suppose the second part of my question is really, how much do you think these translation grants are kind of shaping, they're playing a kind of taste-making role, and do you get a sense of there's a PhD in that, but
yes, but they do they do shape it, especially if it's a thick book and you're not getting a grant and the country hasn't anything to offer you, you're going to think twice. Even an independent press is going to think twice. The big houses has got shareholders, etc., so they can afford it. But as an independent, you think really hard if it's a big book. This book, if everything was done to it, Claire was paid her fair wage, the author was paid his fair, printer and the printing costs. You have to think about printing costs today because it's so expensive. It goes up every 2 or 3 months, the cost of printing. So you have to find a way. But if it's really a thick book being translated, you really have to think hard. And I do anyway.
okay.
Sorry, you do some one specific question. Your skills in translating, your skills in translating Mandarin and children into English. Translators to open.
I can't hear.
Yeah, sorry, could you just
I
repeat that?
can't get that.
Mandarin Chinese.
Yeah.
There are books that have been translated from Chinese. I'm not sure if it's Cantonese or Mandarin, but there have been some books that are translated. I would, if people are interested in literature to see what has already been published, please go to the World Kidlit website. There it is, and actually Outside in World, who are supporting this event, that actually there is a wealth of information to be found on those websites. The World Kidlit website is searchable by country, by language. So that is somewhere to go and to see what has already been published and who perhaps is publishing those.
Okay. Thank you so much to everybody who came in person. And thank you to all of our audience online. And above all, thank you so much to our speakers one more time.
Yeah.